Welcome back to Wilson's World. I'm Wilson Curry, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about a vintage firearm, but not just any vintage firearm. We're going to talk about a Colt Single Action Army. Anybody that's ever watched a John Wayne movie, or maybe when you were a kid played cowboys and Native Americans, that would be politically correct, recognizes that iconic single action Colt revolver. Why is it called a Single Action Army? Because in 1873, when the U.S. government solicited various firearm manufacturers to make a new gun for the cavalry initially, this is what Colt came up with. And the reason it's called a single action army is self-explanatory. That's when it was first developed for. Is that a single action revolver is one that, once again, we're going to put this on half cock and we're going to make sure there's nothing in that that's going to go off and put a hole through the floor. Having cleared the cylinder, we'll close the loading gate. We're going to bring it back and do it again. So in a single action revolver, the action is just that. It provides a single action of cocking the gun and firing. Never put your finger on the trigger. Never. Until you're going to actually fire a gun. So even in showing a gun to anyone, never put your finger on the trigger. So the single action is cocking, and then as you squeeze the trigger, it falls and the gun goes boom. Now, I'm going to tell you something about this one. This is an extraordinary restoration. This is wonderful. You can see the case colors on this, and that's what that's called, a heat treatment, the case color, the frame of the gun, and then rich, rich blue. Well, whoever did this firearm, and we think we know who did it here in New York State at one time, did a wonderful job of restoring it. But the question is, how does that affect the value of a Colt Single Action Army? And in this particular version, I'm going to tell you how it affects the value. The job done was extraordinary, so that does put at least a premium on it as opposed to somebody working on the gun that didn't know what they were doing, polishing out all the numbers and all the other identifying marks. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. It also still has the original walnut stocks on this firearm. But nevertheless, it's been restored. So we value this gun just the same, probably in the $2,000 to $3,000 range. At least we're hoping. We currently have this firearm for sale. Now, if you find a Colt Single Action Army, incidentally as well, and we'll show you the serial number right here on this, this firearm actually dates from 1877. And the early Colt Single Action revolvers had a screw here in the frame to hold this base pin in, and that's how you pull the cylinder out of the firearm. Later guns had a cross pin here for making the cylinder base pin a little easier to remove and removing the cylinder for servicing and cleaning. But this one is serial number 24611, which puts the manufacturing date of this firearm at 1877. Keep in mind that Colt first made the number one, which only one that they made, was in 1873. That's the first patent dates you'll see on the side of the frame of any vintage and correct Colt Single Action Army. We'll have those patent dates right there. It'll also have roll marking on the top of the barrel stating that it's Colt Manufacturing and the location of manufacture, which was Hartford, Connecticut. Once again, this one in restored condition, because it's so well done, it's chambered also in .45 Colt caliber, which is what we like more than anything, 5.5-inch barrel. Once again, probably in the $2,000 to $3,000 range. However, as I stated, if you find a Colt Single Action Army vintage, once again, meaning before World War II, and it's in this condition, in original condition, and looks this good, you should value the firearm more at $4,000 to $6,000. Now, speaking of condition, let me show you how that gets affected when you find one that's not quite as nice as this one. Here's a Single Action Army that we found, I don't know, sometime back, I think in Buffalo, New York. And this is as found condition. Someone at one time had put what looks to be simulated ivory grips on it, though I like the way that looks. I'll show you a couple nuances about this. Now, fortunately, this one dates, this looks like a 6-digit serial number, so this would date after 1910, but well before 1930. Now, you also notice the difference in this firearm right off the bat is that you'll see the ejector rod housing, which incidentally is how you unload one of these firearms, something I could have shown you before, was once the cartridges are fired, you push them out using the ejector rod, which is in this housing. So on this Colt here, you'll notice that's missing. Now, at one time that may have fallen off, or somebody wanted to take it off to make it easier to conceal. It still has the screw hole there where that was once attached. And also on this one, you can see that the base pin button has been removed. It's no longer on this, and if I pull that pin out, as I stated before, and turn the gun over, bring it back to half cock, I can pull the cylinder right out of this. So we kind of need to have that reinstalled on this firearm to make it right. So at this status, all we do is put it back together and leave it like that. Would never fire this gun in this condition, though. This gun, once you replace this that releases the base pin and perhaps put another ejector rod housing on it, this firearm still functions nevertheless. Very, very nice. Very nice. Actually, it feels very good. But how does that affect the value, finding it in this condition, knowing that vintage Colt single action revolvers are worth thousands when you find them in super good condition, original condition? It doesn't always have to be mint, but original condition is critical in firearms. So how does it affect this? We've discussed that this is, you might be in the $2,000 to $3,000 range. An original one in that condition would be $4,000 to $6,000 range. But you find it like this, and this is where you approach with caution, because valuing this gun right now, in my world, would probably be at best $1,000, more likely a little bit less. Once again, in different parts of the country, they may agree or disagree, but I would not value this particular single action in its current status at over $1,000. However, we put a replacement ejector rod housing on it and the base pin release, and I know the gun functions because the action is pure Colt, C-O-L-T, 4 clicks to cock it. I would value the gun then, with those parts replaced, probably at around $1,500 plus or minus, because the finish is pretty well worn on this. So there's our first segment on vintage firearms, and this is one of the most popular and well-known vintage firearms of all time. So stay tuned for future episodes where we'll talk about antiques and their values and some great firearms as well.